Welcome to the Red Sneaker Podcast, your guide to success in the worlds of writing and publishing. Now, here's your host, best-selling author and founder of the Red Sneaker Writers Center, William Bernhardt.
Hello, Red Sneaker Writers. This is episode 21, going out on June 17, 2019. This podcast is for Red Sneaker Writers, people who are serious about building a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them do it. For this broadcast, I'm speaking to you from the small group seminar I'm currently teaching in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. So I'm not in my usual recording studio. If you occasionally hear some background noise or a car driving by, I like to think that just makes the whole experience more authentic. At any rate, I assume that you can live with it. This is a terrific retreat. I love doing these small group retreats where I get a chance to take a small group of aspiring writers and take a deep dive into their book, reading it, giving them feedback on their manuscript, instructions and critique and everything. The rate of success, percentage of people who have come out of these retreats and published their work is high. So I like to think it's a successful program and one of the best things we do at this Red Sneaker Writing Center. If you think you might be interested in that, I've got another one coming up in July and another in New Orleans in December, and there's still space available in both. For this podcast, my interview is with James Scott Bell. I hope that name seems familiar to you, not only because of his great work, but because he's been on the podcast before. And in fact, I've gotten more feedback, more email from that interview and seen more downloads of the podcast than anyone I've done. So I asked Jim to come back and talk to us again. This time he's going to talk about many things, but in particular, how to build and create a memorable series character. As some of you already know, James Scott Bell is a presenter this year at WriterCon, our annual writers conference in Oklahoma City over Labor Day weekend. He's delivering the keynote on Saturday night at the banquet. He's teaching some regular sessions, and on Monday, he's doing a special masterclass, a 3-hour workshop on taking your fiction deep so that it goes wide. I've heard him teach before, and in my opinion, there is no one better out there. This interview is great too, but first, the news. There's a lot of news going on in the publishing world right now. I've picked 4 stories that I want to focus on. 2 of them are essentially updates of things we've talked about on the podcast before, and then 2 news stories that I think are worth talking about. First, possibly the biggest news rocking the publishing world right now has to do with Barnes & Noble. Many times we've talked about Barnes & Noble and what their possible future might be, how much traditional publishing depends upon the one remaining national bookstore chain. Their outlook has not been great in the past, but we knew that they were on the market, so to speak, and now it looks like they've got a buyer. In fact, now it looks like they may have a couple of buyers and be able to make a selection. Just a few days ago, before I am recording this, it was announced that a hedge fund called Elliott Advisors has put up $638 million in a bid to acquire the company. That's calmed a lot of fears and caused not only a lot of relief in the New York publishing world, but also sent Barnes & Noble stock skyrocketing up several points in a single day. This Elliott purchase is on behalf of a corporate group that owns the British bookstore chain Waterstones. I believe Foyles is also a part of that. And the chief executive of Waterstones, James Daunt, has done a terrific job in England of rejuvenating that chain. Now, apparently, he is set to become the CEO of Barnes & Noble, and everybody hopes he will work the same magic there. And yet, just 2 days after this was announced, it was also announced that there was another potential buyer, somebody else who was interested and was putting together a bid to outbid Elliott Advisors. So as I'm recording this, It doesn't look like we know for sure. I'd still predict Elliott Advisors and Waterstones, but it doesn't look like we know for sure who's going to acquire Barnes & Noble. But it does appear that it's going to be acquired, and that is certainly good news for bookstores and people who like to shop in bookstores and people like the New York publishing community that are pretty much dependent upon the future sales of print books. I love independent bookstores too, but I'm glad that there's going to be a future for this one last large national chain. I think that's good for writers. Whether you as a Red Sneaker writer are looking toward small presses or self-publishing or traditional publishing, the more bookstores out there, I think, is beneficial for all of us. Second update has to do with a story I discussed earlier, featuring a young Jordanian-American author named Natasha Tynes. You may remember she's the one who caused sort of a social media shaming scandal when she posted a picture of a transit worker with a somewhat critical caption online, and there was backlash so badly that it led to her publisher, a relatively small press called Rare Bird Lit, canceling her publication, canceling her book. She was not happy about this. She was basically accused of not only being sort of inappropriate and rude, but also being racist because the transit worker in question was a woman of color. Well, she's fired back now, and you always admire people who don't just take it lying down, but speaking as a lawyer myself, I'm not sure this is the best move. Anyway, let me tell you what she's done. She's suing Rare Bird Lit now, asking for more than $13 million in damages, which I would guess is more than Rare Bird Lit is worth by far. She's alleging that the company defamed her and breached a publishing contract, which, of course, it did, in fact, cancel the book. The question is whether they have the right to do so, and I can't answer that without having seen the contract, which has not been published anywhere I've seen, but most publishing contracts do give a publishing company the right to cancel a contract under certain circumstances. We've also talked on the podcast before about how some modern publishing contracts will include a clause that allows the publisher to cancel the book. Basically, if there's some kind of social media firestorm or they're accused or found to be inappropriate, racist, sexist, whatever. Tynes is saying in her complaint, filing the lawsuit, she says that the company, Rare Bird, quote, an all-white company, end quote, inaccurately painted her, a, quote, immigrant woman of color, end quote, as racist and benefited from the backlash. I'm not sure how canceling a contract really benefits you, but I'm sure there's some theory out there. You see what's happening now. We've got massive finger pointing. I'm not racist. You're racist. No, you are, and so forth. I don't know how this lawsuit will come out. It's hard for me to believe that she's going to get rich off it. Maybe she would settle for just having her book reinstated on their schedule. I don't know. I'm just speculating. I mean, if it were me, I would have published an apology, said I made a mistake and tried to take my book somewhere else or published it under a pseudonym or whatever. But maybe I've had too much experience with the litigation to hold out much hope that it's going to do anybody any good. What's the takeaway for the Red Sneaker writer? Don't get in this kind of mess in the first place. Yeah, you need to be on social media, but you need to be careful about what you say and try not to say anything that people are going to take offense to. Avoid political posts, which are not going to help you sell your books in any way. Avoid anything that could be conceived as insensitive, racially, gender-based slurs, or anything like that. Just keep cool and stay above the fray and focus on what we really care about, which is literature and books. And speaking of that, now see how I so brilliantly segued into my third story, which is about, there's some news in the background, but I'm going to keep on going, the Amazon Literary Partnership. Some of you already know what this is. This is basically a philanthropic program that Amazon started about 10 years ago, and now it's given away over $12 million in grants. Now they've announced about a week ago their new slate of recipients. And, it's unequivocal. They're helping support literary voices. In fact, one of the components of this program is their expressed interest in underrepresented voices. So this Amazon program is now one of the leaders in this industry, promoting diversity concerns and trying to push us toward a more inclusive model for business and art. In addition to the normal awards, they're giving more than $1 million to 66 American nonprofits that are dedicated to serving writers one way or another. They've also announced 2 special grants of $120,000. One of them is going to the Academy of American Poets, a group of which I'm a member and I've received awards from in the past. The other is the Community of Literary Presses and Magazines, often called the CLMP, another great organization. The literary magazine that my wife and I publish, Conclave, is a member of the community. So I may be biased, but I think these are both terrific grants. And I think it's, worth taking a moment to just point out that since Amazon often gets characterized as this greedy, huge, monolithic business, and they are hugely successful to be sure, and you're hearing politicians talk about, breaking them up, they're too big, well, they're doing some good in the world as well. And speaking of publishing at Amazon, I think we should take a minute to talk about Amazon publishing itself. Now here I'm not talking about self-publishing through KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, which is obviously a hugely successful program, but Amazon also has its own independent publishing company. That's Amazon Publishing. I should clarify, when I say independent, I don't mean independent of the parent company, Amazon. I mean independent of the big 5 New York publishers, or for that matter, any other publishing house. But this is a traditional publishing company. It's just one that happens to be a branch of the country's largest book retailer by far. Well, Amazon Publishing has just turned 10. It's almost hard to believe it's only been 10 years. Because they have been wildly successful. It's kind of a plus when you're aligned with the largest retailer in the country, but this publishing program has been very successful, and many people, this can be disputed, but many people would say this is the best publisher to have if you're going to have one in this day and age, because you've got an automatic in with the largest retailer in the country, and it would be crazy to think that the retailer is not going to favor books that are published by a sister company. They've made some big attention-getting deals recently as well. In early May, we found out that the company's Montlake imprint, they have 16 different imprints covering just about every kind of book you could possibly hope to publish. Anyway, in early May, they signed best-selling author Sylvia Day to a 7-figure advance for a book called Butterfly and Frost. Now, a 7-figure advance is so rare these days, even in New York, that almost never happens. Maybe for a handful of legacy authors, but even there, it's increasingly small. But here's one handed out by Amazon Publishing, and for what? For a 203-page novella. Yeah, you heard me right. It's not even a full-length novel. And she's getting 7 figures for this novella that they're going to publish in a month or so. The publisher of Amazon Publishing, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I think it's Michaela Bruder. She said that this very much reflects her ability to spend the money she thinks is appropriate on authors who fit into their program. Quote, "I have no problem going after big authors," she said. And that quote goes back to late 2018, which, as I noted at the time, the Thomas and Mercer imprint, that's the one that handles crime